Hello and welcome to our fifth installment of One-on-One with Broadway director, choreographer, and Tony nominee, Larry Fuller.
Good afternoon, you out there, Facebook musical theater people. Anyway, I think we left off last week when I was finishing Funny Girl, and I got to do the national tour and the London company with Barbara. And then I came back to the New York company after we checked out. We came back from London the day after the opening. Unfortunately missed Noel Coward's opening, which he had invited us to, because we had to go to LA to check the show out because it was going to open in Los Angeles the next week, and that was a very important opening. And so we did that, and then I came back to the New York show. And I can't remember exactly what year we were in by now, but by the time I actually left Funny Girl, all of the television musical variety shows had left New York. And so there wasn't any way to pick up some extra money to live on by dancing on television. And I wasn't really ready to go back into a chorus on Broadway, so I was struggling through, and for the first time in my entire career, I had to look for work outside the musical theater. So I just went around to different saloons and bars, and I'd walk in and say, "Do you need a bartender?" So I got like 4 part-time jobs out of that, and the best one, really, the one that made me the most money in one set, was at a gay bar called Peter Rabbit's on Christopher Street and West Street, right on the river. And my old friend George Marcy from West Side Story days was the manager of the bar, so he gave me the Sunday afternoons. I made good money, really good money. The tips were great because it was very busy. And I remember I'd use it as an acting exercise because everybody, I was still young and my street value was still up. So whenever anybody would be sitting at the bar, and there were lots of them, and some of them had specific things they wanted the bartender to be. They wanted you to be their best friend, or they wanted to hit on you, or they wanted to tell you the sad, sad story of what's going on in their life, or whatever. And I used it as an acting exercise so that I would read what they were wanting and I become that. And so that way it made it fun. Of course, people that were trying to hit on me, I never left with any of them, but we had a little play. Anyway, then I got an offer to do West Side Story in Germany. And so my friend and also a really good choreographer, Alan Johnson, had been doing all of the West Side Stories, but there were 2 companies that he couldn't do because I think he was doing Shirley MacLaine or something. And so we had a mutual agent, Jack Linney, who was also Michael Bennett's agent, Jack said, "Do you want to do this? You want to do West Side Story in Germany?" And I said, "Absolutely, sure, what an adventure." So I got to go to Nuremberg, yes, that famous German city, and they have a huge opera house there. And it was to be the first German language production of West Side Story done in Germany. The movie had been even a bigger hit there than it was in America. And they'd only had one international tour go through that was in English. So it had never been done in German. Now, I didn't speak German, but I had a very good bilingual dialogue director, very nice man, and I had 2 scripts, German and English, and and I knew the show so well, so I just kind of watched when they were in German, and I'd ask my dialogue director, are they saying the same thing in German as in English? And sometimes they weren't. So I had to adapt here and there. And the dancers I got from the opera house, they were signed to the opera house as their ballet, as they call them. And the majority of the men were from Eastern Europe, and most of them weren't very good. The women were better, as usual, so I got to get them to do West Side Story with any kind of real guts. I mean, I cajoled, I begged, I yelled, I did everything I could think of to wake them up and get them to at least do the acting part. If they weren't doing the dancing so great, they were doing it. And opening night, we had an American Maria, but everybody else was German, or from Eastern Europe mostly. And opening night in Nuremberg, it's a tradition in Europe, because it's an opera house, that the creative staff take a bow with the company on the premiere, as they call it. And so I had to bow with the musical director, my great friend and co-collaborator, Charles Axton, who is also American, and thank God for him, because if it hadn't been for him, the music would never have come together. Anyway, we bowed for probably 10 minutes. I mean, they wouldn't let us off the stage. It was astounding. I'd never seen a reaction like that. And so that gave me a clue as to what their audiences there were hungry for. And that was, I believe, and it proved out to be correct, musicals. They were getting tired of their old operettas, the White Horse Inn and the Deflator Mouse and so on. Anyway, after Nuremberg, I went then to Vienna, and I redid it. It had been done 2 years before by Alan, and some of the people were the same, but at least half were not. So I redid it in Vienna, and we had the same result. Phenomenal opening night applause. It just going on and on and on. So then I came back to New York, and I think I've got myself out of consecutive events. Actually, after I left Funny Girl, I was doing it. I did it in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I remember the winter, it was so awful. It was 40 degrees below zero. And then I also did it for the Goober, Ford and Gross Company, which was also called Music Fairs, that they had like 8 round theaters, some of them permanent buildings, some of them tents, that were on the Northeast coast. And so I was hired to do the choreography, and 2 weeks before rehearsals began, whoever the director was supposed to be, and I don't remember at the moment, he pulled out of it for something else. And Jack Linney said to me, "You think you can direct this?" And I said, "Oh, sure I can. I mean, it's in my blood. I know it backwards, forwards, and inside out." And he said, "Well, okay, I'll ask them." And sure enough, they said, "Yes, we'll take him as director." So it was in the Round. Now, I had never done anything in the Round, let alone Funny Girl. And, you know, I knew the proscenium version very, very, very well. And for it to adapt it to the Round was something that I had to kind of work into, because the Round obviously has different staging rules than the proscenium. I remember Michael Bennett said to me, whatever you do, don't put your principal actor dead center unless it's for a specific point. Always put them over at the side on an aisle, because that's how they get the wider scope of the audience. That was one of the very, very wise tips. And oh, by the way, Michael and I, by that time, yeah, he had left me. And we had been together about 4 years, and he had been in Bajur, a musical about gypsies, and Chita Rivera was the lead. And he'd also been on Hullabaloo, the kind of rock and roll television variety show. And by this time, he had choreographed A Joyful Noise, his first Broadway show. So he was on his way. And we were still obviously communicating. We were friendly. Didn't see each other very often, but we were friendly. So I came to do Funny Girl in the Round. Well, my first set meeting with the set designer, I remember his first name was Fred. I think it was Fred Vopel, but I'm not sure. He came to my apartment, and we sat down, and I said, okay, what do you think we should do? What have you got for me? And he said, no, Larry, wait a minute. You're the director. You tell me what you want. And I went, oh, I didn't know that one. So that was my first experience directing and relating to the set designer. Well, I was so wrought up and so upset with myself that I stayed up almost all night, and I worked everything out completely. So I called him the next day, and I said, okay, I'm ready, you can come back. And he did, and we got along great after that. And it worked, whatever I came up with. And of all people, the woman playing Fanny Brice was Carol Lawrence, the original Maria. Now, nobody would have thought of Carol Lawrence as a Fanny Brice, because she's beautiful. So, but I knew that she could be she loved doing slapsticky stuff, comedy and cutting up. I remember that from rehearsals for television shows that I was dancing on with, not with her, but behind her. And so I knew that side of her, and I knew that she could do comedy. So that I wasn't worried about. I was just concerned about how beautiful she was. And James Mitchell, who was a DeMille dancer, he did the Dancing Curly in the film of Oklahoma, and he did a couple of other films partnering Sid Charisse. But he was also a very good actor, and he was gorgeous man, and I think the best Nicky Arnstein ever. He was just wonderful in it. So we had a good cast, and it was a huge success. It sold out everywhere, all 8 theaters. And then they were coming to the end of the run, and the producers, Gruber, Ford, and Gross, decided they wanted to take it around to about 4 or 5 other theaters again, because it was so successful. So Carol said she couldn't do it, and because she couldn't do it, Jimmy Mitchell said he didn't want to do it without her. So who do we end up with? Barbara Cook. Talk about a strange Fanny Brice, but she had just done it in South Carolina somewhere that summer. So she knew the role, at least a version of it. She didn't know the original. And her Nicky Arnstein was to be George Hamilton. Gorgeous man, about 10 or 15 years younger than her. And I just thought, this is so nuts. I mean, Barbara's a theater pro, so she'll be fine. But, I mean, George Stevens, has he ever even been on a stage? Oh boy, this is going to be hard. So, as it turned out, it was the other way around. George was a dream. He was a terrific man, and he really knew how to be on a stage. And Barbara was a psychological mess. She had evidently just divorced, or her husband had divorced her not so long before, and that really set her up. So she was just starting to gain weight, because when I knew her in Music Man, you know, she was this little girl, a woman with a tiny little waistline and small hips and all this stuff. And here she was, at least 40 or 50 pounds heavier. And she was on diet pills, speed. And the poor George, every time they'd start to go through a scene that had already been staged, she'd never let him get through the scene. We'd get somewhere in the middle of it. She'd, oh, wait. Oh, I have to take a break. And she'd run over to the water fountain and take another pill. It was hard. But she turned out okay, didn't she? And I haven't even seen him since then, but I will always remember working with him was a pleasure. So after Funny Girl was such a big success, then Goober Ford Gross Music Fairs decided I was the fair-haired boy, and they gave me other productions to do. I did Kismet with John Raitt, and I did I Do with Lois Hunt and Earl Wrightson. They were a kind of famous operetta couple that were kind of getting up there, but they had been quite well known. And I did The Music Man, also with John Raitt. And interestingly enough, I wasn't sure that John would make much of a Henry Hill. Harold Hill, thank you. But he did. He turned out to be terrific. The audience loved him because he has so much charm, John, or had. And I also did an I Do with Jane Powell and John Erickson, who was somewhat of a film star, although he never became a real movie star. And of course, Jane, everybody knew from the MGM musicals. So I was sent to California, to Los Angeles, to rehearse with them there, because we were going to open in Honolulu and then come back and do the music fairs. And I stayed, and the producers wouldn't pay for a rental car for me at that point. I wasn't important enough, I guess. And I was staying free of charge with Tony Sharmely, a very well-known television and Las Vegas choreographer who was a friend. And every morning, I would wait in front of Tony Sharmely's lovely West Hollywood Hills home and wait for Jane Powell, MGM star, to come and pick me up so that we could go rehearse and I could direct her. Well, I remember quite often standing there thinking, boy, little boy from Rolla, Missouri, you're waiting for an MGM star to pick you up so you can go and direct her. I mean, my God, my dreams have more than come true. And I was so thrilled about it all. And she was a pleasure to work with. She really was. Smart as a whip, too. And John was okay. I think we've lost John since then. but Jane's still with us, bless her heart. So then I went to Germany and Austria. And when I came back from those two experiences, as I said, I was overwhelmed by the reaction of the audiences. And I came back to New York, and this was in 1972, I believe. And that's when I had no work, no unemployment, no television, didn't want to go into a Broadway chorus. And so I thought, what can I do to make enough money to eat and pay the rent? And that's when I started bartending. And then that went on for a few months. And then out of the blue, Jack Linney again called and said, Larry, they want you back in Germany. They want you to stage a national German tour, and also to do it at the Graz, G-R-A-Z, Opera House in Graz, Austria. It's the second biggest city in Austria, and they had a huge 1,500-seat, gorgeous Baroque opera house. By the way, these West Side Stories were not done, as we say, en suite. It wasn't 8 shows a week. They were mixed in the repertory. So, you know, they'd have like 30 performances in the season or something. So anyway, I said, I'd love to, I'm going. And I figured at the time, since I knew this thing about Germans and their reaction to musicals, and nobody knew how to do them over there, and so I said to myself, take what you can carry and stay as long as you can work. And so that's what I did. And after I did the second production at the Graz Opera House, West Side Story, the Opera House asked me to stay and do a Broadway dance evening. And they had pretty good dancers there, so I knew that I could pull it off. And so I did. I decided to do something that I called Jazz and the Dancing Americans. It was a kind of documentary dance review, all done by decades, the 1900s, the 1920s, and so on. And it was about how jazz music influenced social dance and vice versa in America. And I did a lot of research, obviously, and I found all recorded music that nobody cared if I paid to use because, you know, it was somewhere way off in Austria. And so it turned out to be 22 dance numbers depicting the decades of dance craze that happened in each decade, and how the music changed. And I had a narrator in between decades, and I wrote a small amount of hopefully humorous or at least very light-hearted descriptions of what comes next and why. And they had a local television host, local celebrity, BBMC. So, all in German, of course. I didn't write it in German, I wrote it in English, and yes, of course, they... Anyway, I was getting to a point now where I kind of understood German, and I could say, you know, I could say part sentences in German, and then I switched to English, and back to German, and I called it my Deutschlich, because it certainly wasn't English or German, it was both. And everybody there I worked with understood English perfectly, because they'd all been in middle school after World War II. The Allies made a deal with Germany and I guess Austria that they had to teach English to all middle school classes. So they had English right from the beginning through the 8th grade. And that's why they all understood it. But some of them who hadn't spoken it much couldn't really form a sentence very well. But they certainly understood what I was saying. So that helped a lot. And this Jazz and the Dancing Americans was so successful. I mean, it was like My Fair Lady opened in Graz. They had to add performances because of ticket demand, and we were not in the opera house. We were in what they call the Schauspielhaus, which is the playhouse, because it was dark. Nothing was in there at the time, and we filled it every time, and it wasn't small. And then the man who was in charge of the Theater an der Wien, which was one of only 2 German language musical house theaters, one in Austria, in Vienna, and one in Berlin. The one in Berlin was Theater des Westen, and Vienna was Theater an der Wien. And they would do a musical every fall and play it en suite 8 nights a week, just like Broadway or London. And then they'd switch to, after the Christmas holiday, they'd change and open another one, and then that would play through till the summer. And so they did everything exactly as it had been done in New York. Sets, costumes, lighting, everything. Staging, of course. So the intendant there came to see my Jazz and the Dancing Americans in Graz. He liked it very much, and he made me an offer to do it with the dancers at the Theater an der Wien, because they had 26 dancers signed to the house, and there was no dancing whatsoever in Little Night Music. So I put it together again with them, and we did it on Sunday, their dark nights. I was also in it. I was Tommy tuning myself, as I call it, so that the public knew who I was, because I found that if the public knows who you are, then it's much easier to get, like somebody in charge of a theater to be interested in doing something with you. And indeed, it did help. I had a couple of guest spots on television out of Munich, and so that kind of helped me to be known by the public. And I was really, really doing well there. I mean, my career was just taken off. And so I decided what I was going to do was, in a little while, wherever that would have been, when I got to be more well known, that I would do a musical theater repertory company out of Munich, and work into, after 2 or 3 years of doing already written, proven material, start getting German writers to write original musicals. But that all got changed when Hal Prince came into my life. To be continued.
Great. Well, do we have any questions for Larry on today's? We have a few live watchers right now, so if you have any questions, you can ask them on Facebook, and I'll relay them and hear his answer.
When you first went out to Germany to do was West Side Story one of the shows you first were hired to do out there? Was Germany?
That was the first one I was hired to do, yeah.
Were you recreating Jerome Robbins' choreography for that, or was that your...
No, it was totally the original Jerome Robbins. It was not mine. Right. And I mean, who would touch it? Mm-hmm. But Michael Bennett did, because that was one of the things that got him noticed. he did his own version of the choreography in West Side Story for a national, not a national tour, a summer tour, much like Music Circus. I was in rehearsals with him. So, I mean, he knew it by instinct because he had done the international tour. He was in it. He was Baby John, I think. And actually, that's where I met Bob Avian, because Bob was in it too. He wanted somebody there that knew the show so well that I would stop him if he went past. I think it was 8 bars. Could have been 16. But that's as much as you could do of the original choreography in one go. Otherwise, if you went beyond that, they had to pay Jerry Robbins. And so I would be there saying, oh, no, Michael, no, you got to change that. You just did too many bars of the original.
Yeah.
He always would. And Leland Palmer was assisting him. She was going to play anybody's. And Christopher Walken, of all people, played Riff. Anyway, little side interesting tidbit.
That's fascinating.
All right, well, we don't have any other questions, so.
Gee, there's so many things in my head. You have to ask.
We'll save them.
Okay, so we'll pick up again on Tuesday at 2 o'clock Pacific time. Just tune in right here to Ray Lamone's Facebook page, and we will continue with Mr. Fuller and get into some Hal Prince stories.
Oh, yes.
Can't wait.
Many Hal Prince stories coming up.
All right, so we'll see you guys. We'll see everybody on Tuesday, 2 o'clock.
Bye.
Take care.